But just who is
Brock?
Where did he come from? It is a strange story that begins many years ago.
Find out together.
The most powerful underground espionage agent in the Western Hemisphere. I've been trying to get my hands on him for years. What's his next move?
But since you ask, I'll give it to you straight.
here we go. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's knowledge gathering. I am Joss Åkesson, and I'm a tester, and I'm also the domain lead for quality and security here at 1337. And I'm really looking forward to be your moderator today. For those of you that are joining for the first time, we host these knowledge gatherings in order to bring knowledge and expertise directly to you here in the morning. This session will also be made available to view again on our YouTube channel. And there you can also find all the previous knowledge gatherings in which we have been joined by, just to name a few, Jonas Söderberg, Dylan Betty, and Troy Hunt. And for those of you that are tuning in live this morning, you will be able to ask questions. So please take the opportunity and write them down in the chat here, and we'll get to them during the Q&A part of the session. So let's kick this off. Today we are joined with our special guest, who is the director of International Academy at Inspired Testing, and a test automation expert, speaker, educator, and published author, Bas Dijkstra. Good morning, Bas. How are you today?
Good morning, Joss. I'm doing very well, thank you. And thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me.
That's great. And we are very happy to have you. So what's going to happen now is that Bas will be giving us a presentation for around 35-40 minutes. And after that, we will also welcome our CTO, Martin Mazur, to join us for a discussion. As that discussion goes on, you in the audience will have the opportunity to send in any questions that you might have, either around Bas' presentation or things that pops up during the discussion. So just make sure to write your question in the chat, and we will get to them in our question and answers part. And that is during the last half hour or so of this knowledge gathering. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Bas.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody, or good whatever. And now that we're all online and remote, I lost track of where everybody is. So it could be good morning for you, like it is for me, and for Joss and Martin and Axel. It could be good morning, good evening, good anything, really. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join this session. I'm really looking forward to it, not just to doing this talk, but also to having a conversation with Martin and to answer all of your questions in the Q&A section of this knowledge gathering session. As you also already said, my name is Bas Dijkstra. I am the director at the Inspired Academy. And in that role, I'm responsible for creating and delivering training opportunities for our staff. So the Inspired Testing staff, which is around 250 to 300 people, mostly in South Africa and some in the UK, but also to our global client base. So that's what I do. Before that, I've been a test automation engineer and consultant for about 15 years. And in this presentation, I'll be sharing some of my experiences being a test automation engineer. Some of the things that went sort of kind of okay, some of the things that went really, really badly. And my main goal for this session, for this talk for you today, is to make you think a little bit about how you organize your testing and your automation in your team and in your organization. Bit of a spoiler alert, do we really need a test automation engineer? That's not a simple yes or no question. So I'm not going to be answering that with a simple yes or no, otherwise it would be a really, really brief presentation. Let me start with telling you a story about me as a test automation engineer back in the day. In one of the projects I worked in the past, and actually not just one, but it's this one project that keeps on popping up in my mind. Maybe because it was so ridiculous, but a lot of the characteristics that made it ridiculous I've seen in a lot of other projects that I've been working in later on as well, and later on in my career when I became more of a trainer, a coach those kinds of opportunities. I saw these things happening, and I still see them happening with a lot of teams and organizations that I work with. So what I used to do as a test automation engineer is literally automate tests, more specifically automate regression tests. So in this company, in this project, we had a test team that was responsible for testing, for creating and executing test cases, for making sure that the quality of the software was, or making sure that everybody knew about the quality of the software. That was a really slow process, and as that company, it was a telecommunications company, tried to release more often and be more agile, be more being able to adapt to market changes and market demands quicker. They wanted to automate all of their regression tests, and that's where I came in, and some of my colleagues came in as well. So what we did literally was we were given this stack of, and I think it was about 150 test cases, regression test cases, really long-winded regression test cases that covered a multitude of applications in different environments. It involved time traveling, actual time, so not like DeLorean kind of time traveling, but setting and resetting system dates and times in an environment. So it was really elaborate. And what we did was trying to recreate those regression tests in code. So we were literally put in a corner of the building somewhere, given a stack of regression test scripts with the sole task of, please automate these regression test scripts. We don't want to do them anymore. It takes a lot of time. They're incredibly boring. Please automate them for us. So that was our task. And we were literally, the success of our project and the progress of our project was measured in the amount of regression test cases that we successfully automated. And to make things a little bit more ridiculous, successfully automated meant that we were able to run the automated regression test script 3 nights in a row without any failures or exceptions, which means that as long as we saw that green check mark at the end of the script, it was okay. There wasn't really a lot of, well, what are we testing anyway? What are we testing in the first place? Is this good code? Is this well structured? Is this actually useful? No, it was just, we have these test cases and we want them to be automated. We want them to run green, and that's it. So that's what that project looked like. And to some extent, I still see that in a lot of the teams that I'm working with. And we have these automated regression test scripts, and we have these regression test scripts. They are long-winded, they are boring, so we want to automate them. And so a lot of teams, organizations that are looking to get more of their, looking to get started with automation or looking to get more out of their automation, that's where they start with these regression test scripts. As you can probably tell, in that case, for that specific project, the results were horrible. It was a total train wreck. We spent, and it started out okay. So we were able to automate some of the easier, simpler, shorter test cases quite quickly. But then we got to the difficult ones, and we had a lot of, we had to duplicate a lot. We didn't really know what we were doing anyway. So we weren't really practicing good programming principles and patterns. We were just using a tool to automate those regression test cases. And the longer we took and the more regression test cases we added, the messier this whole thing became, until we were so busy just trying to keep the test cases that we already automated in the past running, that we just didn't have the time to add new test cases and to improve our code and to actually make it more robust and stabler and those kinds of things. This was way back in, I think it was 2007, 2008. It's still a lot of teams, again, that I work with, organizations that I talk to, still, this is still what they talk about when they talk about test automation. We want somebody to come in and automate those regression test scripts for us. And more often than not, unfortunately, this is what you get. You get a mess, you get a train wreck, really. One of the most important reasons, I think, and I only realized this, so I've got a bit of a slow brain maybe, but I really only realized this surprisingly recently maybe, is the reason why this doesn't work is because what you're trying to do is just replicate what a human being does by a bit of code, or if you're using a low-code tool, by some abstraction layer on top of the code. These regression test scripts, they're written by humans, so they are you've got your testers, test analysts that create these regression test scripts with the initial purpose of having them executed by human beings, which means that they're often written from an end user perspective, often involving a graphical user interface, because that's the only component, the only interface of your application that's specifically written to be interacted with by a human being. So for human beings, it makes total sense to use the interface, the graphical user interface, that is specifically written for them to interact with the application, to observe the application's behavior, and to find any potential risks and defects in your application. But because this interface is written for human beings, that sort of kind of automatically makes it the hardest interface to automate. Because when you do automation, when you start to introduce automation, you're suddenly not interacting with your application as a human being anymore, but using code, or again, some kind of abstraction layer on top of the code, which then is translated into code, which then is translated into zeros and ones. And just trying to replicate what humans do and how humans interact with an application in code is incredibly hard, and it's clunky, and that makes automation at the graphical user interface level by far the hardest type of automation there is. Again, because you're working with an interface that's not designed for a computer to consume, but for a human being to consume. So, and again, I've only started thinking about this surprisingly recently, triggered by some other people who were talking about this stuff way earlier, people like Ellen Page, for example. The graphical user interface automation, it's the hardest part to add, the hardest thing there is to automate, and everybody starts there, which is, and now that I've been thinking about it and talking about it and writing about this a little bit more often, is surprising. Let's keep it at surprising. It doesn't really make sense to me anymore, but that's what you get, and that's what a lot of people still do, and that's unfortunately also the approach that a lot of automation engineers still take when they are hired. So we're just going to automate whatever it is that the testers are doing, but it doesn't work. So you see a link at the bottom of the screen. It was written by Blake Norris, who's an engineer or director, I forgot, at Slalom Build. And it's a perfect, it's a really good overview. He gives some really good arguments about this exact thing, why it's not a good idea to automate test cases, had to just work with automation as a means to replicate what human beings do and how human beings, testers, interact with an application in order to find out valuable information about the quality of that application. Just a management summary. The first reason why it doesn't really work, this approach to automation and to automation engineering, is when you start automating regression test scripts, you're already too late. Because by definition, these regression test scripts are written and executed after the fact. And by after the fact, I mean after the code has been written and integrated and deployed. That can be a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, in some cases, a couple of years later. And you might think, well, why is that a problem? It is a problem because you don't get to you've lost, once you start automating way after you write your actual code, you lose the opportunity of talking about improving testability and automatability of your application. It's really hard to convince teams and people who are in charge of the budgets and the planning to improve testability and automatability way after the code has been written, to refactor code, to add additional interfaces, or make it easier to test and automate applications. Why? Because there's no direct value for the customer. So, and that's why it's at these discussions about refactoring codes and applications to improve your testability, automatability is so, these discussions are often so difficult, and it's really hard to advocate for improving testability way after you actually write the code. So what you get is this is an example of a Rube Goldberg machine, by the way. What you get is these incredibly intricate, complex, and often brittle test automation solutions, and I'm using air quotes here for when I talk about solutions, because they don't really actually solve anything. They often just introduce more problems. And because you don't get the opportunity to talk about testability and automatability and how can we write efficient tests if you automate way after the fact, you often have to make do with what's there. You have to work with spaghetti code. You have to work with applications that you can only communicate with through graphical user interfaces. Again, interfaces that were written for human beings and not for computers to consume. So you add that's where you get these incredibly complex test automation automatons, machines, kind of things that try to perform a really simple task in a really, really complex way. So yeah, that's what I've seen a lot in the past, and then unfortunately that's what I still see a lot. What I still see happening a lot in teams, organizations that I work with. And looking back at the about 15 years I've been in the business right now, I thought, well, I suppose first of all, a lot has changed in test automation, in the test automation. So we've got a huge array of wonderful open source libraries that we can use to write our automation. So in that respect, the tools have become a lot more useful, a lot more powerful. And there's more of them, so there's bound to be a tool that is a good fit for the problem that you're trying to solve. But there are also a lot of things that haven't really changed, and that's the approach again that a lot of people, teams, organizations take with regards to their automation efforts. So if you've been in testing and more specifically in automation for a while, you've probably seen this whole the market, the demand for test automation engineers has only grown over. So when I started in 2006, it was a bit of a niche in testing. So I worked for a large software testing services provider. They had about 800 to 900 software testers in the company. And there was just a single unit of about 20 people who worked with and concerned themselves with test automation. That was 2006. Things have changed a lot. The demand for test automation engineers has skyrocketed, really. So it's really hard to find job openings in software testing that do not talk about tools and automation. And I often joke as a tester, you have to work really hard to not have a job in software testing at the moment if you've got some experience in automation. That's really hard work. So what do people add? What do to fill this demand, to find an answer to this demand? What a lot of people, teams do is make this transition or trying to move people, push people from being manual testers. And the quotes around manual testers are deliberate here. I think you can call yourself a manual tester if you're testing manuals. Other than that, you're a tester. So this whole, but what you've seen is people at teams, organizations want to move their people away from manual testing into automation engineering, which I think is a really bad idea. Why do I think it's a really bad idea? First of all, it's not one or the other. You're not a manual tester, or I've seen people talk about automated testers, and if you think about that term for a bit, it starts to make less and less sense the more you think about it. So please don't use that. But making that shift from being a tester to an automation engineer is difficult. It comes with a lot of hurdles because there are a lot of additional skills that you need to take up on. So I've not seen a lot of people who were really, really successful at doing that. Why? Because that whole role of test automation engineer, or rather how people see test automation engineers and how people are recruiting for test automation is that role, that view that they have of test automation engineers, or SDETs, or whatever people call it. It's an incredibly difficult role to play well. So again, I've tried it I've been in this area of software testing for quite a couple of years now. And I've noticed that it's incredibly hard to be a good test automation engineer, especially because there are so many different skills, so many different skill sets you need to master, really. And you're always in this, and that's probably the biggest problem with You're always in this split between being a good software tester and being a good software developer. So why do you need to be a good software tester? Because you're working in testing. If you the way people see and talk about test automation engineers, they are you are the way I see automation is supporting testing activities and trying to perform specific testing activities more efficiently through the use of tools. So you need to, as a test automation engineer, or how people perceive the role of test automation engineer, you need to be really good at software testing, because you need to know what good software testing looks like. You need to be able to perform that yourself and have good knowledge about what parts of software testing can be performed more efficiently through the use of tools. So that's one part of that split that you're in as a software tester. The other part is you also need to be a good software developer. Why? Because test automation is software development. And it doesn't matter if you're using code-based libraries or these low-code, the low-code type of tools, because you are still writing code. It's just that with these low-code applications, the syntax is a little bit different. You're using a different kind of abstraction layer on top of the actual code. But you're still writing code. So now, when you're moving into, and when you're trying to become a test automation engineer, you need to do the work of two people. You need to be a really good software tester, and B, a really good software developer. Because you also want that test automation code to be well-designed, robust, easy to maintain, stable, fast, whatever. Everything that you also want from your application code, basically. Just to give you a quick overview of some of the things that you need to know as a test automation engineer. So again, you need to know something about software testing. So you need to have some experience in exploratory testing, what people do and how tools can help you do that. Critical thinking is probably the most important quality of a good software tester. Risk analysis, asking good questions. So I tend to joke that the only proper definition of QA is question asking. So we don't do quality assurance, but we ask a lot of questions. Or quality advocacy, that works too. In the software development area, you need to know about the principles of object-oriented programming, because that helps you write better test code. Solid principles really help a lot there. Clean code, the ability to write clean code, to write good code, to design software systems, to do refactoring and to do code reviews. That's all part of what software developers do. And because as a test automation engineer, you're a software developer too, that's something that you need to be able to do as well. Then there's all these tools, unit testing frameworks, API automation tools libraries, UI automation tools libraries, performance, security, accessibility, all these different kinds of libraries that you need to know and have experience with. And finally, there's all the software engineering bits that come in with test automation. So the ability to work with continuous integration pipelines, cloud platforms, version control systems, containerization technologies, and package managers and build tools. So all of these things, that's as you see, that's a big list, and this is by no means a complete list. But the way we look at test automation engineering, you need to have experience with all of these things. And that's exactly why there are so few people I know that are really good at all of these things. Or to put it a different way, that it's not a job. You're basically asking for an entire development team, which is also some kind of a spoiler or hint into the direction that I want to go that I'd like to see more teams get into. But again, I've met very few engineers who were able to do all of that really well, who were good software testers, were able to write good code, knew a lot of different frameworks and libraries really well, and were able to select the right one for the job, other than just being a library fanboy and trying to throw that at every problem they found, and also had experience with the CI pipelines, version control, and on all those kinds of things. It's really hard to find people that are skilled in all of these things, and that's also why becoming a test automation engineer is so bloody hard, because you're basically asking for the skills of an entire development team in a single person. And so what you often get then is mediocrity. People are, the people who try to do it all are often scraping the bottom of the barrel, really, in all of these things. So really mediocre at best in all of these things. And I don't think that's something that you should strive for in your career, but also in your team. I thought you should not strive for mediocrity. We want to build high quality things. We want to build, we want to do good work that's fun, and mediocrity often doesn't combine with those things really well. And finally, when you do find that person, when you do find that magic unicorn, that in Dutch we call it a five-legged sheep, when you do find that person, what you often get is silos, which is basically what the project, what we had in that project that I talked about at the start of this talk. And we had this test automation silo, and everybody started looking at us, and we weren't even mediocre. We were really bad at what we did in hindsight, but that's a different story. But everybody looked at us. So everybody looks at that test automation engineer whenever we start to talk about automation and about writing tests, which is not a good way to collaborate, to share knowledge, because automatically all of those things because everybody looks at that one perceived expert or that senior person and said, oh no, let them do it because they know how to do it and we don't really want to touch it. So that's trying to do and to combine that all into a single role or even a single person isn't really a good way to foster collaboration and communication. And that's where I get back to my the title of this talk. So do we really need that test automation engineer? Please do not read this question as, do we need test automation? I think we do. It's when done well, it's brilliant. It's a great catalyst for delivering high quality software faster, for what people call quality at speed. When you want to release or at least build new versions of your software multiple times a day or even multiple times a week, you're gonna need some tools that help you do some of the testing. So that's not what I want to talk about here. Do we need to? Yes, I think we do. We absolutely do. What I've come to realize, though, over the years, and hopefully some of the reasons for that are now a bit clearer for you through this talk, is do we really need specialized test automation engineers who are responsible for all that? I don't think so. I don't think it really works. If you try to combine all of that, combine the software testing and the software development and the engineering aspects of test automation into that single role, into that single person. So what do we do instead? I think it's much better to see this as, I think it's much more productive, especially in the long term, to see this as a team effort. So instead of focusing on becoming a test automation engineer who does it all, or recruiting that test automation engineer who does it all, try and make that part of the team responsibilities, and of by making it an integral part of your software development process, helps a lot. Which means instead of doing test automation engineering often after the fact, because test automation, what you often get with test automation engineers is you get back these silos, which we saw again, where software developers develop, testers test, and the automation engineer falls somewhere in between and waits for something to automate and then does the automation. I don't think that really works. I think it only slows you down, really. So instead, what I'd like to see in the area, the space of testing, and specifically in automation, is more collaboration, is developers playing a much bigger part in automation, and the testers helping them to do that better. And that means that yes, we need a lot more. We need to talk to each other, and to each other mean people who develop and people who test. We need to talk to each other. We need to work together much more closely, because I think that's a much healthier and much more sustainable way of creating good quality software and creating good quality tests to help you create that good quality software. Why? Because when you work together, when you work really closely together, you get you get the discussion, you get the opportunities to talk about testability, to talk about automatability, to talk about what do we want to test in the first place. Those discussions and that collaboration, that sharing of experiences and sharing of knowledge, it doesn't really happen when developers develop, testers test, and automation engineers engineer automation. It's when you work together, when you do pair programming is a great way to do that, for example. To have a developer and a tester work closely together to think about what is it that we want to test, how are we going to write the tests so we can actually perform those tests, and what is left for us, what kind of risks are we not aware of that we can cover with exploratory testing, for example, and how can we help each other to write better software. I think that's a much more sustainable way than working in these silos and looking at the test automation engineer to do all of that. Yes, that requires a shift in skill sets too. It requires developers to actually become proficient at software testing. It requires testers to learn more about how software is actually written. That doesn't mean that they need to be able to write all the features themselves. They do need to be comfortable, however, talking about that and discussing a good way to illustrate this maybe is to make a separation between what and how. And so as a software tester, you need to be able to discuss with a software developer what to test and what that application or component or feature that you're building is going to do, it's good as software if you also know a little bit about the how, but at least you need to know about the what, because that enables you to have those meaningful and valuable conversations with your developer and work together to create good quality software that actually provides value to customers, and also that to make sure that the proper things are tested and automated. So I think we should, and it's a good thing that some of the teams that I'm talking to and working with are already doing this, and they just see testing as a much more integral part of the software instead of something that's that's stuck on at the end. It's really becoming weaved into the entire software development process, and they have testers that are able to work with, to pair with developers to create, and they have developers that are actually able to do good testing, because contrary to what a lot of people believed and sometimes still believe, developers can do good testing. Absolutely. So where does that leave the tester? I think for software test, instead of becoming an automation engineer and basically hoarding all of the testing and automation tasks, I think as a tester, it's a much more sustainable way of working is to be more like an advisor, a coach to the development team, to do some of the testing, but also to make sure that the rest of the team A, knows what good testing looks like, and B, is able to do the testing as well, to have meaningful conversations about software testing, because I think that's where the really good things happen. That's where the magic happens, so to say. So that's why, and again, that's something that I've been thinking about, talking about, sometimes writing about a little in the last couple of years. And I was really happy to. So just a couple of weeks before this session, we had a workshop on test automation and test automation strategy with the people at 1337. And I was really pleased to see that collectively we talked about it. We came to this conclusion as well, that it's probably at that test automation engineering, as we've traditionally seen it, is incredibly difficult, and it's almost unreasonable to expect that a single person or single role can be responsible for all these different things you need to master that make test automation engineering, that make up test automation engineering, and that it's a much more effective approach would be to have developers and testers work much more closely together, and between them. And it doesn't have to be a pairing. It can be a mobbing session, or it can be you can do it asynchronously through code reviews and those kinds of things. But I think synchronous collaboration, like with pair programming, mob programming, is even more effective, because you can have actual live discussions and live questions and knowledge sharing, which is just a little bit harder to replicate if you're doing that asynchronously through code reviews and stuff like that. But I was really happy to see that we kept returning to that point, to that realization that maybe having a test automation engineer, or aspiring to have or to hire or to become that test automation engineer, may not be the best way to actually succeed at test automation. That's it for me for the presentation part of this session. Joss, back to you.
Much, Bas. It is so interesting to hear your thoughts, and it brings up very many interesting aspects. So let's dive into the discussion, and that means that I'm going to welcome in our CTO, Martin Mazur. Hello, Martin. How are you today?
Hi, Joss. I'm good. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Very interesting talk, I would say. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
I agree. Thank you so much, Bas, for that talk. That brings up so many ideas and questions and things I'm looking forward to talking to you about.
Awesome.
That's great. Great to hear.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that too. Yeah.
And before we start, I just want to remind everyone that are watching here that if you have any questions, make sure you send them in, and we will try to get as many as possible answered at the end of this. And to start the discussion off, I would like to begin by asking you, with what we just heard in mind, what is a good structure for a team when it comes to test?
Would you like to go first, Martin, with your thoughts, or do you want my thoughts first? I'm happy either way.
I mean, I can start. I think, first off, I really agree with this talk and what you're talking about in the sense of test automation engineering. And the main point that I think you bring up that is very valuable here is that when we do test automation, what we're actually doing is we're building a whole separate system. So we're building two systems. We're building the production system, which should deliver to the client, and we're building this other test automation system, and that's code, and that's software development, and it needs to have all those things you had in the software development box, the architectures and principles of solid principles or Cupid or whatever principles you want to go, and it needs to be refactored and maintained. And code is, contrary to what many believe, it's not an asset, it's actually a risk. So when you double the amount of code, like now we have one production system, we have one test system, we've actually doubled the amount of risk. So we have to double the amount of team, and we have to double the amount of risk mitigation. We have increased maintenance costs, and all of this, as the article you kind of alluded to by Blake Norrish, needs to be calculated in to make this like kind of cost benefit analysis of how much should we automate. And the second point, that when we talk about team composition and how we should work, and you brought up a lot of these good points, I'm thinking that we're at this point where the industry is messed up, because the way you talk about test automation engineers brings me to the way that people talk about full stack developers. This is like, oh, so we want this developer and they should do like the front end, but we also want them to do the back end, and preferably they should be able to deploy and also automate all the servers, and also preferably write script the servers and do all this stuff. And then it's really good if they also know everything about branching strategies and Git and everything, and we call that a full stack developer. Do you have one of those? It's like, no, like.
And I love how you forgot the testing part of that.
And the testing part, yes,
just
of course.
Forgot to mention it in that huge list of response. Again, it's the same thing. It's not a job description. It's a team.
Exactly.
You're looking for a team.
So to come back to like circle all the way back to Joss's is a great question here. Like, so how do we structure those teams? And I think it comes back to, we have to look at the teams as a collective competency of what the team should be able to do. So for whatever set of problems, whatever product you're creating, you're going to have a set of competencies that go into that team. And that might be, you know, design, that might be testing, that might be certainly engineering. It might sometimes be legal and marketing and sales and like other things that the team needs in order to solve the problem that they're posed with. And in that team, we're going to need the people that have the deep competency, and you know, people that listen to me have heard this a million times. And then we got, and then everybody else has to have like the broad competency. So we're talking about this T-shaped competency, right? Where you have your depth, but then you have enough knowledge to be able to have fruitful and good conversations with the other people on the team. And then we work together to solve the problem, right? So we shouldn't try to fit everything into one person, but we should build and compose the teams of people that have broad general knowledge and a good depth inside of their speciality. And then that's going to depend on the problem. It's going to depend on the product. You know, if it's going to so exactly who should be on the team. Hard to answer, but I think, you know, just make sure we have those T-shaped people.
Yeah, and I think that too comes back to a different way. I think a different way of talking about, because that T-shaped profile, that and we have the pie-shaped and the M-shaped and the Coombe-shaped, and where basically it's people need to know everything about everything again, and again, I don't think that's really that's not really realistic to expect from expect from any individual. And another way of looking at it is, again, I think you need sufficient. You need. It's good to have expertise. Again, go deep into one specific thing. That can be testing. That can be development. And when I say development, again, that's maybe just the front end or just the back end, or know a hell of a lot about databases or architecture, environments, those kinds of things. So there you really need to know a lot about how. But you also need for that broader base, for again, like you said as well, to have those meaningful conversations, you need to at least know, have conversations about the what. You don't try and be an expert at everything, because again, I think that only results in you being mediocre at best at everything. But need know enough about what those other competencies entail, what it means to be a front-end developer, what they do, and have meaningful conversations about it. That doesn't mean you need to know everything about it, but enough to work together with them and again have those conversations and ask them the right type of questions.
And I think a bit related to this, perhaps, but Bas, how would you build confidence in the team when it comes to test activities and what you mentioned?
Again, I think working together helps a lot there. It's really hard to, and then I'm going to make an assumption here, which is really dangerous to do as a software tester, but that there's at least one person in the team who has sufficient experience there. In a team of all juniors, it's going to be really hard to build that confidence, because nobody really knows what they're doing. Not saying that all seniors know what they're doing, but that's a different discussion. But let's just assume that there's at least someone who has enough experience to do things with enough confidence. Have them. I think it's their responsibility to make sure that others get to that level too. I've been an independent consultant for a while now. I've always been an external hire, so just either a consultant or just a bum on the seat, a meat widget in a team. But the way I've looked at it is it's my people hire me for a bit of expertise, for knowledge, for experience. It's my goal, and I think my professional responsibility, to make sure that I make myself that I'm able to leave that team again as soon as possible. But and the only thing to do that is by helping them grow. And I think that's the responsibility of any senior, to make sure that you do everything you can to help others get to your level of expertise.
I mean, there is this great saying, and I think, I mean, that's exactly how I think most leaders should act, but they don't. And your goal, essentially, as a leader, is to get everybody on your team promoted. Like, your goal is to make sure everybody becomes promoted, and that's what you should be working towards. So I think that's great. And then when we come back to kind of the confidence question, I also think it's kind of about team dynamics. Like, does the team actually believe and know what the goal is or the problem is that they're trying to collectively solve? And are they collectively working towards that goal? Like, and I've seen this evolution, and I've been in the industry for long enough to kind of see how this has morphed when it comes to testing. And one of my first assignments as a consultant was in this company. It was really good engineering culture, really good test culture in the company, but this was also a time before Agile became popular. So, we had our dev teams and the development teams who used to, work with building stuff. And then there was a floor with the test lab on that floor. And this particular company had a lot of hardware as well. So it was like hardware, it was code for the hardware, and then there was the software parts and the open systems and everything. So they built this huge test lab with all. It was fantastic to walk into, but that's where all the testers used to work. And you really had this feeling as a developer that you shipped things to test, and test was not your friend. Test was mean. They were there to break your stuff. They came back with more work that you didn't really have time to take care of, because when the bugs came back from test, you were already working on the next thing or the next version of the software. So now you had to reschedule everything to fix the bugs. And so there was really this pain of how you worked with tests. And there was really this, we are developers, they are testers. And then as I think, Agile progressed through the kind of community, we started seeing tests inside of the teams. And this is, what I think you're talking about, Bas. Like, when you have working inside of the team, it's different. But the thing is, even if we had tests in the teams, we were still silos. Mm-hmm. We might have been sitting in the same team. We might have been working in the same iteration on the same tickets and just one desk across. And then I met this fabulous person. Like, this is the best tester I've ever worked with, best test automation engineer I've ever worked with, a dear friend of mine as well, that didn't only come to me with the problem, also came to me and said, listen, I found this. I also read the code, and I think this might be your problem. And do you want me to sit with you as we work through this? And at that moment, I was like, this is the testers I want to work with. I want these people. I want more of these people. And that's what I think builds confidence in the team, being that person. Not, haha, I found your bug, but like, here's a thing, here's what I think it might be wrong with it, and do you want me to work on it with you? And the other way around for the developers as well, like, go to test being like, can I sit with you? Can we test this together? Can you show me something? I think
Absolutely.
That can build the confidence, the openness.
And that requires a different kind of confidence too. It requires safety too. Just safety and the feeling comfortable with talking about stuff, failing, admitting that you're not perfect, which is really hard for some people. But it requires a lot in terms of team culture and team dynamics there too. Because if you have these people who think they're God's gift to programming or God's gift to software testing, or and find it really hard to share their knowledge or to admit that they're wrong, to open up to that I might be wrong here. It's going to be really hard to have those valuable, meaningful conversations and to get that culture of actually being comfortable in working together. Because if you work together, it's going people are going to see what you're doing for a living all day and how you work and who you are much more closer. And that takes confidence. That it takes confidence and trust to build that trust. Maybe.
But if we look at the increase that we have seen in demand for test automation in the last few years, at least what I have kind of noted is that these kind of qualities are not the one requested in the ads or so.
Oh no.
But why do you think that the increase what the demand has increased, but also without this kind of request?
I think it is because a lot of people who are looking for a magic solution to testing. They want they see testing as waste, and in some way you can talk as it takes time and money and effort, which we could also use, but it's sometimes still seen as a bit of necessary evil. So they let's just automate it and use automation, and then magically our testing problems are all solved. And that's how, unfortunately, a lot of companies and teams and still think about testing and automation, and that's reflected in these job openings, which are these endless lists of tools and technologies and frameworks that you need to master, without a lot of focus on I don't really like to talk about soft skills, but the personal and the human and business and communication skills. But it's I think that's partly due to the way people see testing, and that's partly our fault as testers too, because it's still really difficult for us to tell people what we do and show them what we do, show people the value of what we do. So I think that definitely has something to do with it. So the people just see some testing. Oh, but we're automating everything here, and we're doing this with SpecFlow and Selenium in C#, and we're using this kind of. And so you need it rapidly becomes this checklist of technologies, and sometimes they get really ridiculous. We've all seen these examples where people ask for 5 years of experience with a framework that's only been around for a year and a half. That it's, but yeah, and it's funny, but it's also sad because it's true. And that's how people look at automation as, and when it's. When I start asking people about what's your automation strategy, the first thing they start talking about is the kind of tools they use, not how it's embedded in the team and in the process and who does what and why they're doing it in the first place. And well, you've been in that workshop, Joss, so that there's a reason we started with why, and we had so many interesting discussions around the why, the where, the when, the what, and the who of automation that we didn't even get to the how, which is the final part, which is where the tools come in. That's it's the most fun part, but it's in some aspect it's the least important and the least interesting part of this whole discussion around testing and automation. Yet that's still how a lot of people perceive it, just throwing tools at problems instead of making sure that it's actually done properly.
No, I think, I mean, that's the industry problem. I mean, it's not, I don't believe it's a test problem. I believe it's like a software development problem.
It is. I wasn't saying it's a testing problem. We sort of kind of keep that alive, contribute to that, keep that alive, because we as testers often find it difficult to tell people and show people what we actually do. It's that doesn't mean it is our fault or our problem, but I'm not sure we're really helping. We could be doing more to work on that problem, I think.
No, I mean, I'm coming back to this the article about Blake wrote, and what specific phrase he used, which was test automation factory. And I find that phrase very interesting because, you know, we talk about empowered product teams and the work that Marty Kagan is doing, and Marty uses the word feature factory, right? Because so you know, you set up a software team and you feed them user stories at one end, and you expect features to pop off the other end, and you ask the software team, like, what are you doing? Like, oh, we're building features. So they're in a sense this feature factory, and in this test automation factory, like, you know, we feed in tests at the other end, and automated tests come out the other end.
When you talk about so that's, I think that was the actual name of the department I used to work in way back in the day. That's something like a test factory, a test automation factory. And it definitely reminds me of that project I was talking about in the beginning of that talk. It's just put them in a corner, feed them the regression test scripts, and somehow magic comes out.
Yeah. And the problem is now you have a bunch of people, intelligent people, that spend like years of their life getting really good at building software. Like, and I mean all of the people, because, you know, we're software builders together, whether we work with development or testing or design or whatever. Like, we're software creators. And the only thing you do is you put them in some kind of assembly line to assemble stuff. You don't allow them to think. You don't allow them to think like, why are we doing this? For what purpose? What problem are we trying to solve? You're just like, welcome to the factory floor. And not only is that bad for what you're creating, so you're not even creating good software anymore, or good testing. You're just producing stuff. It's also like this huge waste of human potential, and it pisses me off so much. We have all these intelligent people that could be doing awesome stuff, and the only thing we do is sit in that corner. I'm going to feed you stuff in this end, and I'm going to measure you on the stuff that comes out the other end. How many story points did you do this iteration? Like, good developer. And it's just so annoying.
I was waiting for you to bring up the whole discussion about story points or t-shirt sizes or Fibonacci sequence or whatever, and it's so and the relentless focus of burn down charts and comparison. How many story points did we do this sprint? And we want to see a 10% growth in story points over a certain period.
Yeah. But
it also reminds again of that project where we had this huge Excel sheet of these 150 regression test scripts, and our only task really as the test automation team the test automation factory was to make sure we got to the end of that list.
Yeah.
They really didn't care too much how we did it as long as we did it, which in hindsight is a lot of wasted time and effort and human potential as well. Absolutely.
But there's a flip side to this, because like the reason this happens is because like we're trying to find measurements, right? We're trying to find stuff we could measure. And naturally we, measuring output is easier than measuring outcome. Like asking somebody like, so what was the impact on our business of this test automation?
Are we going to talk about code coverage here?
Oh, if you like. But just let me get to a point. So I think and then that there's from engineering and testing and from the software professionals, there's also this resistance. It's like, oh, so to this list that Bas just produced on his huge slide, you also want to add business acumen. You also want us to tell you what business impact the software we're building. No. Like we're already way overworked.
Now you're actually making me feel bad for not even including the whole. It's that entire list, but that was still so technology focused. And now the next time I'm going to do this talk, I'm going to make this huge overlay of, and then there's the business stuff. So,
but again, I think that competency needs to be in the team. It doesn't necessarily need to be in every individual, but it needs to be in the team, and we need to start talking about what what impact the things we do have on the product and on the business, rather than talking about how many lines of code or test coverage or story points or whatever. I mean, that's just, what does that mean even?
It's added. It's and that's something I learned from you today and in our preliminary talk on Monday. The great way to talk about it is indeed the difference between output and outcome. Because all of the metrics that you just mentioned is just output. How many widgets did we ship? Instead of talking about what was the impact of those widgets to our business, to the bottom line, to our end users. How happy did it make them? And it's difficult, especially in testing and automation, to have meaningful conversations about it. And people ask me about what are some good metrics around test automation. A part of me is tempted to just say, well, code coverage and then run. That would, but it is really hard because it's a cog in a much bigger machine. It's an important cog, but just like development, its contribution to the overall outcome remains really hard to measure, to discuss. But and nobody ever came to me, or well, maybe you could see it in that project that I talked about initially. Nobody comes up to me with a bag of money and says, "Can I get 500 kilograms of automated tests, please?" It is, however, and we still talk about automation, because that's what I do, what I know a little bit about. But software development in general, if you talk about story points, it's just about I want 20 or 147 story points. But what does it mean? How does that actually make your product better? How does that actually help the life of your business or of your end clients? That's and that is I don't have all the answers to that either, but it is I think it's a much healthier way to discuss it and to get a little bit closer to talking about the right things and measuring the right things, to talk about it much more holistically than just how many widgets did we ship today, how many lines of code do you write. As a tester, I've seen these ridiculous things. Well, I found $20 in 15 minutes. Okay, excellent.
But if you have already touched upon it, but so when you move to a more like coaching or leadership role, would you miss anything from working as an individual contributor in the team? I mean, there are two aspects of this. If you focus the time more on the coaching, you might not be able to.
I think, I see that. I've experienced that myself. So, in a way, so I've recently shifted to an entirely different role. So I've always been a consultant and an engineer, but now I'm running a department really. So it's partly true what you say, is because I don't write automation code all day. I didn't do that when I was more in a consultant role either, because then it's my role to help others become better at what they do, or as a trainer. What I do like about this is that you get to cherry pick a little. That moving into a leadership or coaching type of role doesn't mean you suddenly drop everything that's hands-on. I think it's actually good because it allows me to cherry pick and work on the interesting problems, and the rest of the time help others who are typically less experienced or experienced in different kinds of things, help them to get to my level. But until they're there, I can still work on the interesting stuff and cherry pick a little and help others along the way to get to that level. So I think there's still a lot of interesting stuff left, as a coach or as a leader. A lot of hands-on stuff that you still get to do yourself, and that'll probably depend from one person to the next. But I think it actually gives a lot of freedom to focus on the interesting stuff and to help others get to that level as well, by first having them upskill and grow through doing the things you did a couple of years ago, for example. So I know it is. I think that's a great position to be in, actually. So and for test coaches too, that they can still work, do exploratory testing sessions, do these all these kinds of brilliant things that they do. Because as a coach, I don't think it's your job to just tell others what to do. I think it's much more effective to show them what to do. So that means you actually get to do the fun stuff yourself as well, while also helping others to become better at what they do and at what you do. I think it's the best of both worlds, really.
For me, I could talk about this for an hour. I actually have talked about this for an hour. I did a talk at NDC Oslo last year called The Leader's Leap, which is precisely this topic. So, but I'll try to get like the most important points across. I think what happens to people when they move from an individual contributor position into a leadership or coaching position, like the first thing that happens is you need to recognize that leading and coaching is also a skill set. It's also something you need to learn. You need to read books. You need to get good at it. You need to practice it. And just as Bas talked about, test automation being this huge thing, like now you're adding on another thing. And you become that in that split, right? So I need to keep up the tech work and I need to keep up the leadership stuff, and it just gets too much for one person. So, the first thing you need to do is you need to drop the focus on individual contributions. Like your worth for the team is no longer what you yourself do. Your worth for the team is how much better you can make everybody else. And for a lot of people, like it's their own ego holding them back from becoming a good leader, because they still want to be the expert. They still want to be the best one in the team. But, surprise fact, think about a lot of the test coaches or test leaders or tech leads or other leaders you've worked with. They were probably not the best at doing the work. They were the best at helping others do the work.
Absolutely.
And I think, this is what burns people out when they go into leadership, because they try to be a leader and then they also try to be the best individual contributor on the team because they think that's expected from them. But it's not. So I think like we need to talk about this, that when you move into lead position, it's okay not to be the best at the thing you're supposed to be doing, because now you're supposed to be the best in helping others grow. And also being, as Bas mentioned, having that humility, that humbleness of sitting down with a junior. Like, I've done this. I know very little React, but I've been a tech lead on teams that run React stuff. And being able to sit down with a junior who's been 2 years in the industry and be like, wow, that's so cool. Like, show me how this is done in React. I've never seen this. And then you can come in with a deep knowledge and say like, huh, but like this code and this code looks the same. Should they really be duplicated? Isn't there a smarter way of doing this? But then let them tell you what that smarter way is in that specific framework or technology. You can't tell them how to do that. So I think that's the big thing that, of course you're going to miss it. Like, I still code, but like I'm not professionally as good coder as most of my colleagues. Like, most of the people that work with software development at 3037 are way better developers than me. I focus my skills on the leadership and coaching stuff. And I can't keep up with both, and I don't believe anybody can.
No, and we talked about this in a preparation talk on Monday as well, that I am at that position, right? With the new role that I'm doing, I have to, and I'm still actively learning that, to be comfortable letting some things go, and instead helping others to do that what I used to do myself in the past. And that is a skill too, and that takes time. It takes and I think humility is a great way. It takes a bit of humility, and we you see a lot of talk about servant leadership, for example. And I think to be able to do that well, you need to be humble. You need to be able to admit, I don't know everything. I see that in the training that I do as well. I love doing so hands-on training with code-based libraries with developers, for example, because I get so much input about, but why didn't you write your code like that instead of like what you're showing right now? And I learned so, and I typically say that at the start of a training too. Well, please give me that feedback, because I'm in no way am I the best developer. But what I am going to try and show you is hopefully a way of thinking and reasoning about things, and a way of solving problems, and general concepts behind tool. I'm not going to teach you all the ins and outs of a specific library or anything. Because that doesn't make sense. Well, you could just Google that, really. But it's very similar to what you just described. It's letting go and being comfortable in letting others get really deep into something and show you how some things are done.
But if we think about this also in the increase of the distributed team and the remote setup, what kind of differences to get this work done in a good way have you
That is a really good question, because it's in some ways it made things a lot easier, and this whole remote working thing. So I literally save 2 hours a day because I don't have to commute anymore, which frees up a lot of time to do other good stuff, both professionally and privately and personally. But yeah, it is also harder because it's just harder to keep the communication going, and with working remotely. And I think it's here to stay. Again, I'm a think I'm a pretty good example of this. Well, 90%, 95% of my coworkers are 10,000 kilometers away. Luckily, they're still sort of kind of in the same time zone, but they're literally at the other end of the world. But it is, and that means it is really hard sometimes to get that conversation going and keep that communication flowing. And I see it with training online. It works. It took me quite a bit of time to get used to it, to do training online, because I think, and I still think there's just no replacement for actual live in-person training, because it's so much easier to facilitate communication and collaboration there. But I've gotten better at it too. So it's yet another skill to be able that it doesn't just apply to training, but to working in a team as well. And that facilitating that communication and making sure that people don't just hide behind their webcam and hide behind their screen. That's a skill, and that's something that you actively need to work on as a team, to check in with everybody from time to time, and what from time to time means is different for each team. Sometimes maybe once a day, once an hour, once a week, it depends. But just to make sure that everybody's still engaged, involved, and on top of things. That too is a skill, and I'm pretty sure not everybody's getting that right, but we are slowly getting used to that. And so the entire world was sort of kind of thrown into that 2 years ago. So we had to learn that on the fly. And I've seen teams do very well in this, and I've seen teams struggle a lot with this as well. And I've struggled with it too in my training, for example. But I think I've gotten less bad at it to facilitate and to keep that communication going. But it is hard. It is definitely harder than when you're all working in the same room and just walking over to someone and looking over their shoulder and say, "Well, what are you doing there?" That's just in a good way, not what the hell are you doing there? Not in that, but it has become harder. So you need to actively, it needs to be an active process. You need to consciously, actively make sure that everybody's still motivated and everybody's still on top of things, and that takes time and effort. That's hard.
I think that, as Bas mentioned, we were thrusted into this kind of involuntarily. I do believe that distributed working models and work from anywhere is a concept that's here to stay. But the reason, we sometimes find it difficult, the reason it hasn't always been playing out is because it's new. Like, to most people, it's not something we've practiced. We haven't practiced it. We haven't figured out really how it works. And what a lot of companies and teams try to do is taking their current ways of working and just bringing them online. And that doesn't function in the same way. It's like when we do any type of these big transitions, when we went from individual offices to more team settings, you couldn't keep the same way of working. You figured out new ways of working. And it's the same thing with this. We need to figure out, what tools work. When do we need to meet? When don't we need to meet? How long should we have the meetings? How should we use the tools? What should be synchronous communication? What should be asynchronous communication? And there's so much stuff that's just not figured out yet. Like, we haven't been doing it and retrospecting and improving it for long enough to be good at it. So we're kind of just like thrusting around here, but I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good paradigm, and it solves some of the issues we've had in the software development community. And you know, as long as we keep building on it, we keep improving it, we're pragmatic about it, we meet when we need to meet, I really think we can, you know, come up with good things. But then back to the question, like, what's the biggest challenge? Like, so what have I been struggling with? Well, it's probably precisely what Bas is talking about. You know, you have this idea that when you're, especially when you're creating, when you're building something, you can get very isolated at points in time. So, you know, self-motivation is a thing that we've talked a lot about. You know, how do you create self-motivation? Because if you had a bad day previously, if you get out of bed, it's raining, you're not feeling too well, you come in and your team is there, and like they will help you get back on track and motivate you. If you just, you know, eat your breakfast and sit down in front of the computer, your team isn't naturally there in the same way. And reaching out to your team and being like, I don't have a technical issue, but I'm not feeling too good today, it's not really natural in the same way. So I think there are a lot of these aspects that we need to think about this. Like, it's not a perfect setup.
No, it's this. You miss out on so much nonverbal communication, and just seeing people, just the way somebody sits in their chair behind at their desk tells you so much about their mood, their mindset. And that's really hard to gauge when you're working on, especially if people turn off their webcams. Again, that's their decision, but it makes it harder. It makes it even harder to talk about those kinds of things, and to just detect them in the first place, to see, well, hey, my coworker's probably not feeling that well, not doing that well, which was much easier when we were all in the same room, because it's much easier to pick up on that.
And in the context of, you know, what we've been talking about today, you know, we talk about working together as a team, like pair programming, you know, tester and developer and things like this. So, you know, now we need to make sure we do that even if we're remote. The tools are there. Like, there's nothing tooling wise, technology wise, keeping us from doing those things. We just need to have the practice of like, all right, tomorrow you and me, we sit for 2 hours and we work together. And not just, you know, go back into our silos and sit alone at our computers.
And that again, it takes humility, it takes trust, and just that you won't get it right, and maybe the first couple of times it feels awkward or ineffective or just draining. But yeah, that, as you said, it's this way of working. It is here to stay. I firmly believe in that as well, because there are so many good things about it as well.
I agree. And I think that it's time for the question and answers. So we need to jump to that. But thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. So let's just go to the first question from the audience here. What is the first step for going into test automation? Getting a test automation engineer, or change the team to avoid silos?
So I'm going to interpret this question as for a team and not for an individual. The first step for going into test automation as a team. I think the very first step is, again, and in the workshop we did a couple of weeks ago, we talked about test automation strategy. I think the very first thing is taking yet another step back. So why are we doing it? Are we doing this for the right reasons? How do we talk about it? Why are we doing this in the first place? But once you've decided that this is a good thing, this is what we want, it is just taking stock of what have we got in our team, what experience, what can we do, where do we want to be, What's our end goal? Where do we want to get? What kinds of skills does that require? And how many of those skills do we have in our current team? Do we need to hire a new person? Do we maybe need some training? Do we should we start talking to that other team across the hall or the virtual hall nowadays that has done this before, that we can probably learn from? And I think that is very much looking at your team, say, well, to what extent are we able to actually do this? So I think that's before you start throwing tools at problems or start talking about tools and technology or what kind of it is. What would we be able to do with the team that we've got right now? And how far does that bring us towards where we want to be, and take it from there?
So here's a fun experiment you can do, and I'm not really suggesting you do this, but just do it in your mind, or maybe do it in your team. Remove testers from your team, like not all of them, but like remove half of them, and see what happens. Now demand the same type of quality, same amount of work, but just remove half of the testers from your team. Now the developers have to help, because otherwise there's not going to come out any stuff from that team. And developers like to automate stuff. So now you're on a good path of breaking the silos and getting on top of test automation. So the reason I'm saying this is because the best test automation efforts I've been at came out of necessity, have came from the perspective that we're grossly understaffed, like 10 developers to one tester, where the tester basically says, like, I can't do this. Like, there's no way I can go through everything you output. So either you help me or we're screwed. And that's when developers get involved, and developers go like, oh, and we can write this, and then we can do this, and maybe we can do this better. And the tester goes like, yeah, and if we do this, then we can do this also. And then when you start building this really cool thing. But if you have too much test on your team, you don't have that happy smash. It doesn't happen.
Thank you I hope that answers the question. So let's take the next one. If testers are not going to do test automation, then who will write the test automation?
Okay, there's two possible answers, and both of them might be equally sound equally strange. But that I don't think I've said that testers shouldn't do the test automation, because I think they still should be actively involved in the discussions, partly in doing it. They just shouldn't take the sole ownership of it. It's again, it's you are a contributor to that process, and what part of that process you take on, that depends. I just don't think that you should be the one that's doing all the automation engineering. So I just wanted to mention that once again, that as tester, you still definitely have a big role to play there, to just have to bring up the questions of what should we automate, what can we automate, how do we talk about automation and how it relates, how it supports our testing, how does it help do a better job as a tester. So it's not like the testers should just walk away from automation and do their happy exploratory testing, or which can also be supported by tools, by the way. So I never tried and maybe this didn't go over it, but I never said that testers should walk away from automation, because I think it's an integral part of what we do as testers and as software development teams in general these days. The second question, the second answer really is, I don't care too much about who, as long as it gets done. It's an activity, and it'll probably depend again on the distribution of skill sets and experience within your team, what you've already got, what you need to, where that goes. And I sometimes jokingly say, I don't care if it's the janitor who writes the automate, as long as they're involved and it gets done, and it has a tangible, visible contribution to the process and to the quality of to the outcome, basically, again, to put it in those terms again. I don't really mind. I still think there's a lot of testing left in automation, and that's where the testers come in. And then there's also the development part where developers can help the tester, show the testers how to do things, how to write better, and do that together.
I think that the what Bas is saying, and what I believe too, is the tester should do all the automation, right? I think that's the idea that we need to everybody needs to get involved. Everybody that can code should be part of that thing. And the way I reason about this is, if I only had one tester on my team, what would I want that person to do? Of course, I want them to set out test strategies. Of course, I want them to figure out, where are the big problems we can run into. I want them to support the team and the quality work. I want them to run workshops and sessions and be coaching and checking in with the developers and seeing how they can help. Like, the last thing I want is for them to sit and automate stuff, because I have a whole team of other people that I'm very sure they're perfectly capable of automating things. So then if you have 2 or 3 or 4 on your team, of course, some of that is going to be test automation work, and they can also, do that. But on the priority list of what I want tests to put their effort on, it's not on this thing first, but it's also on this thing. So yeah. I hope that answers the question.
So just to give an example that I think that is just underlines what you said. A couple of years ago, I worked with a client that had around, I think it's 6 or 7 development teams, so about 30, 40 developers maybe, and they had 3 testers in total on that population of 35 to 40 developers. And it worked really, really well, exactly because those testers were running workshops, helping the developers to do testing better. Instead of being, they never wrote automation, because you have 35 to 40 developers who are perfectly capable to do that. And it worked really well just because they were really good at what was expected of them, is making sure the quality train runs on time, basically, and helping the developers to do the work, but through running workshops, through coaching, pairing sessions. The last thing they wanted to be is that gatekeeper at the end of the process of all things quality are mine, because that's just not going to work when it's just 3 testers and 35 developers throwing code your way.
But I mean, I just need to put this in as the last thing, because this also goes through running manual test cases. Like, I'm not really a big fan of testers running the manual test cases, because I know developers and designers and everybody else are fully capable of following the bullet points and doing the exact clicking and verifying steps. So this also goes for those things. I mean, testers are much more valuable in other types of work that they could be doing than doing that stuff. So I just wanted to add that in as a parenthesis.
Great. Thank you for the great answers. Next question. How much do you think that how we are organized affects the testability?
Ooh.
Can I do a quick one? All of it.
I never thought of it but can you elaborate on that? Just
well, the question
no,
goes.
Martin actually.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Question, I think the question was pretty clear.
So the reason I'm thinking about this law, can't remember the law, but that the architecture is a representation of how the organization looks. So the way you're organized as a company is also going to be the type of architecture you get. So if you have these big teams working on one huge project, you're going to get this monoliths. If you separate the teams into smaller teams, you're going to get these things. If you have front-end teams and back-end teams, you can have a very separated front-end and a very separated back-end. So the way we're organized is also going to represent it in the code. So by nature, the way we organize ourselves will affect the testability, because if test is a separate department somewhere else, then the architecture is going to be built in a way where there is no testability because it wasn't thought of from the beginning. And then what we do if you happen to do automated testing is now you're just, as you described us, you're just kind of monkey patching it on top, and you're doing disgusting CSS selectors to extract elements that some front-end developer at some point is just going to randomly change because they found a new JavaScript framework, and all your tests are now breaking. So I do think, if we want to build in quality, build in testability from the beginning, we need to make sure to be organized for building in testability, which means bring test into the team, make them part of the team. Don't put them somewhere and, So I vividly hate these kind of outsourcing testing outfits, because that breeds the exactly wrong architectures and testability and cultures, when people just outsource their tests somewhere and hope for the best.
It's Conway's law, by the way, that you were looking for.
Conway's law. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Credits go to Google. So yeah, absolutely true. It is, and the more I think, and the more I hear you talk about it, it's basically all of it. Really, that's probably a really short but the best answer. If you if you aren't able to have to involve the testers, or as a tester, if you're not able to get involved and just wait for developers to throw things your way, it's invariably going to lead to and I'm playing it nice. I'm playing nice here. Suboptimal results. I could say it's just leading to shit, but let's polite and businesslike. I say suboptimal, room for improvement. No, absolutely. So yeah, the more you get involved, and again, and this too is something we talked about in that book. There's some things that help you do that are practices like TDD, ATDD, BDD. That helps create those conversations. And with TDD, it's often a conversation in your mind as a developer. With ATDD, you involve testers too, and with BDD, you also involve your business. But and I'm not saying, well, everybody should do that. I'm not selling TDD or BDD here, but it's exactly the goal of practices like this, to think about those things up front and try and prevent trying to testability, automated bit, or trying to reverse engineer that into your product and your process, because A, it's not likely that it's going to work, and B, nobody wants to pay for that time and effort afterwards.
Thank you very much. And now we have some question touching kind of the same aspects, but what could we as testers do to bring more collaboration in the team? And are there any tools that encourage discussions around quality tests? And
okay, Martin's probably going to virtually hit me when I say teams, but no. But it is, yeah. Start conversations, really, and I know that's a really generic answer, but it's so much of these things go back to, and that's why I love what Jerry Weinberg used to say, that and no matter it's almost always a people problem. Most of the problems in software development are people problems. But it's true. So what I think what we can do as testers is just ask that question to, what are you doing? How can I help? Do you need help? Open that up. Don't say, well, what you're doing sucks, and let me show you how to do it better. Most developers I've talked to and worked with are, it's not the best way to get them to actually open up and collaborate and have that conversation. But that ask those questions, how can I help, and just try and yes, that takes some. It takes something from both ends. I don't like to talk about both ends, because then you get into this whole developer tester dichotomy again, which I think we shouldn't focus on that too much again. But as I think we should, yeah. And again, that's even harder now that we're all working remotely. But opening yourself up to those conversations and say, well, or just propose that. Do you want to pair on this, or on this testing, so I can show you what I do, because I think it can help you get a better insight into what it is that I do, and just open yourself up for those collaboration, for those conversations, really.
I think, I mean, I'm not sure that the person who asked this actually understands how complicated this question is, because it's very context dependent on where your team is and you yourself as a person are currently. Because at some point, if your team is very far off from being a good agile team and kind of viewing the team effort as a success versus the individual contributions as successes, now your mileage is way off. Like, now you have so much more work to do, because now developers are measured on development and testers are measured on testing, and so first you need to break down those walls, and that might mean a conversation with one or a few developers saying, hey, should we start working differently? But if you're already in an agile team, the team views like the collective results of the team as the success. You're much better placed to create those collaborations. So now you can start talking with the team about, so how can we collectively increase quality? How could we collectively do this? And those conversations will be much easier if you already have an open climate. So definitely, it's going to be tough depending on where your culture of your company and your team is. And I think, unfortunately, we're in 2022, but I've still seen these things where test is viewed as some basement with point and click people that just run test cases and nobody ever's seen them. And if you were there, maybe you need to switch jobs to get better collaboration. Maybe it's not going to work because it's a leadership issue.
Thank
Absolutely.
you very much. Anything to add, Bas?
Absolutely. And again, it's and that requires, again, safety and humility and the ability to let things go and don't see yourself as the sole owner of in our case, the sole owner of quality, of that gatekeeper. Just like and I think and that to some extent that goes for developers too. It's not. I really wish that, and luckily I'm seeing a lot of good. And we talk about modern testers a lot, but let's talk about modern developers for a bit as well. That do this well, that are not seeing testers anymore as and testing as this pesky afterthought, where you've got people that point out everything that you've done wrong, and that truly see that it's much more about the collective outcome than maybe your individual output.
I realize we're running short on time, but there was one part of this the question, which was, is there any tools or tests and specifications we can use? And then, I just want to remind everybody watching that Agile Manifesto says individuals and interactions over tools and processes. So whatever you need, first focus on individuals and interactions, then you can start talking about the tools and practices and everything you need. So individuals and interactions go first.
Absolutely. It's getting that communication going in the first place, and only once you've got this, well, how could tools help us? I think tools in this are great for visualization of things, and it's again, tools like Miro, for example, or other kinds of whiteboarding things. But those are only really going to help you if all the preconditions, actually, if you're actually comfortable having those conversations in the first place. And that's, again, much more a people problem. There's no tool that's going to help you solve that.
Great. Thank you so much. Speaking of tools, does accessibility of test automation tools affect the contribution that developers make to test automation?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
That's I interpret it as, if the test automation tools are easily accessible, do you think that, or can you see that affect the contribution that developers make to work with the test automation?
Yes, but I think that goes for any tool. The easier it is to use, the more accessible it is. For example, the easier it is to run your tests, the more likely it is that that you're actually going to run it. The more trust you have in that the information that's provided by those tests is actually valuable, the more likely it is that those tests are actually going to be run. So, yeah.
I'm going to come back to a point I made earlier, and I think this is, from my perspective, one of the biggest problems with immature test automation, because the tools themselves don't solve your test automation problems. They're just like a framework to access your system in a way, but then you need to build a whole library that is specific for your system of abstractions and tools and utilities, and it's an engineering effort. And this is what test automation engineers can do, but this is also what software developers can do. And when I don't know if this is where this question is coming from, but when I sometimes meet teams that are struggling with getting software developers to do test automation, it's because they just have the raw tool. Like, here's the tool, like, use the tool. And the developers go like, but this is ugly and it's disgusting and it doesn't have abstractions and it's going to be breaking if I change one thing. And it's like, and that's not the problem with the tool, and that's not the problem with the developer. It's the problem that, it was never implemented. I said before, we're building two systems, a production system and a testing system. And all the rules that go for the production system, avoid duplication, separation of concerns, all of these things, open, closed, they go for the testing system as well. It's not this second-hand citizen. It's a first-class citizen, and we need to treat it like that. So, it's not about accessibility of the tool, but it's about building up that test system in a way where the developers go like, this is nice, it's sleek, it follows engineering practices, it has a nice architecture, I understand how to use it. I know where to add the different abstractions. Not a lot of people use Ruby on Rails anymore. I understand this, but one of the cool things that Ruby on Rails did for web developers is it compartmentalized where you put stuff. This is your model, this is how it works. This is your view, this is how it works. This is your controller, this is how it works. And these are where things should go in order for you to keep good abstractions. And this is, this is the same thing, it's the same principle. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now we got to the final questions. As you pointed out, Martin, the time is running out. So the final question goes, how should I, as a tester, help my remote team to take the focus away from metrics like the code coverage?
I'm not really sure that you should take focus away from metrics. It's what you from metrics in general. If you want to talk about code coverage in particular, we could go on for a bit. It's metrics in itself are great because that you need to measure some stuff to know how you're doing. It's just that you need to make sure that you've got the right metrics in place. And I don't think code coverage, and this, I'm stealing this from, I think it was Martin Fowler. It's code coverage is a great way to show what you haven't tested yet, but it's a horrible metric for the quality of your tests, because it's perfectly possible. I could show that with like a 5-line example to get 100% code coverage and have totally worthless tests, tests without assertions or anything. So code coverage in itself is what. How do you get that? Show people why it doesn't work again, and with code coverage, that's actually really easy to do. To show people that I got 100% code coverage here, but my test doesn't pick up on any changes or anything or any, so the tests are worthless. They keep on passing, but they don't give me valuable information in case something actually changes in my application on a test or in my code.
So, just to add to that, I think psychologically the way we work is with habits. If I tell you to stop focusing on code coverage, it's not going to be fruitful. There's very few arguments I can do for me to tell you to stop doing something, but it's easier for me to get you to start doing something. So it's not about how do I take focus away from code coverage, but it's like, what do you want them to focus on instead? And bring that in, if you start replacing it with something more useful, it's just eventually going to fade and it's not going to be as important. But you can't just tell people to stop doing something and not offer up something else, something better. So I think you should ask yourself, what do you want your team to focus on, and then make that your cause, and talk to them about the thing you want them to focus on, and then eventually code coverage is not going to be a discussion anymore.
Awesome. Good one.
Yes, really good. Thank you so much. And now it's time to wrap up. So I just want to thank you very much, Bas, as well as you, Martin. It has been a real pleasure taking part in all your reflections here. And also thank you to everyone that has tuned in. And this talk will be available on our YouTube channel later if you want to watch it again. And also keep your eyes open in our channels for any coming knowledge gatherings in 2022.
Awesome. Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Thank you, Joss.
Yeah. I was just going to add that. Thank you, Joss, for facilitating, for moderating, for keeping us in check. Thank you too, Martin, for. I think it's a great. This is a great format because it's much more than just doing a talk. I've done quite a few of those over, especially the last couple of years. But having these discussions and these questions and this whole conversation, it really just felt like a conversation afterwards, is a great way for. I learned a lot too today, so that's lovely. It's a great format. So thank you so much for that, and of course, yeah, again from me as well, thank you for to everybody who took some time out of the day to listen to this session. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
But just who is
Brock.
Where did he come from? It is a strange story that begins many years ago.
Find out together.
The most powerful underground espionage agent in the Western Hemisphere. I've been trying to get my hands on him for years. What's his next move?
But since you ask, I'll give it to you straight.
here we